Hi, I've been recording a podcast since April of 2015. Just wrap your head around that many episodes, one a week since 2015. And as a result, I've had some fabulous conversations with people. So we've picked some of my favorites and some of your favorites to feature in the best of the best. We hope you enjoy them. Love to hear from you what you like and what you want to see again. There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing it all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. All right, emotional intelligence. You know that is an essential ingredient for any effective leader, any great leader for that matter. And there is absolutely nothing new in that statement. If that's all I'm going to say today, you should hang up immediately and go listen to somebody else. But instead, what I'm going to do today is to talk about what is actually new. And that is a recent study that is showing that we are declining in emotional intelligence. Declining across generations, across cultures, around the world, and across industries. Now, I personally think that has enormous implications if you're leading people, because it says something about what you need to do for the people that are working with you, and perhaps for yourself, and especially for your younger talent. And it also has big personal implications for each of us as we think about the people that matter in our lives, in work and outside of work. So today we're going to talk about this massive global study and have a conversation about the implications of that data and the actions that you can take to make a difference in your life and in your team. My guest today is Josh Freedman. Josh has been a guest on the podcast before and is one of my favorite world experts on emotional intelligence, particularly as it goes towards improving intelligence. He's the co-founder and CEO of 6 Seconds, which is a global nonprofit dedicated to teaching people how to use emotional intelligence. And he owns the EQ, Emotional Intelligence Network group on LinkedIn with over 150,000 active members. Instructor for Columbia Teachers College and other places. And he leads the world's, for today's purposes, leads the world's largest study of emotional intelligence. And it's global, which I think is important. And this year, there are some breaking research that we really want to talk to. Josh is the author of 5 books, including the best-selling and my favorite, At the Heart of Leadership, How to Get Results with Emotional Intelligence. Needless to say, helped hundreds of organizations like FedEx, Qatar Airways, the U.S. Navy, Procter & Gamble, Microsoft, Amazon, HSBC, and the list goes on. Josh, it's a pleasure to have you back again.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, Josh, I want to start where I always start, which is why. Why does this topic matter to you? I mean, you've been working in this area for a really, really long time. What's driving your passion?
Well, I think the starting point was seeing that I wasn't good at this and that my lack of emotional intelligence was keeping me from being the person I wanted to be as a leader, as a human being, as an educator. And I started to see that this was the missing link for me. And then over the years, I've gotten to see, tens of thousands of people literally kind of have this moment where they wake up and say, wow, if I change my own relationship with my emotions, everything changes. And there's this kind of liberation. I can just watch people when they have this aha and this sense of tremendous freedom and space that they have to change the way they're engaging. And it's super motivating to see that happening.
Yeah, I can relate to that one. One of the pieces that I like so much about your work, in fact, one of the pieces that I've stolen from you 100%, I give you credit, but I use it all the time, is this notion of the power of recognizing that there is an emotion present.
Mm.
What is it? What's the core of that? And then using that core to think about what are the options I have, the choices I can make. But it starts with recognizing what my emotion really is, and then being able to think differently about those emotions. That's what I love about your work. It's the piece that I hang on to so much. Um, what I want to do, though, is to get your explanation of your model of emotional intelligence, because it's a little bit unique compared to some others that are out there. Some similar elements, but a little bit unique.
Yeah, as you said, starting with that recognition, getting the data. So let's just back up for 1 second and say intelligence of any kind means accurately acquiring and effectively using data to solve problems, right? And we can do that with math, we can do that with language, we can do that with emotions.
Mhm.
So the first step is to accurately acquire this data and noticing the emotions and not just what's on the surface, but we all have multiple feelings at any given time. And it's just part of our basic biology. These emotions are part of our regulatory system. They affect every living cell in the human body. They're part of how we focus. They change our heart rate, our digestion, our muscles. They change everything. So they're there, whether you're conscious of it or not. But in order to accurately get the data, you need to notice not just the surface emotions, but what else are you feeling? And as you start to notice that and seeing, oh, these feelings are affecting me, and how am I reacting? So that's step one. Then, once you've collected that data, it's changing how you make decisions. It's changing the options that you see. And one thing that's quite intriguing is that we tend to notice things that match our emotional states. So emotions in a way are like a pair of glasses, and everything is filtered through that. Again, we don't have to, we can pretend to be super rational. We can pretend that's not happening. Let's just be rational about this. But that's not rational. All right. If we're going to really be rational, we're going to acknowledge that emotions are affecting our perceptions. They're affecting our thinking. They're affecting our behavior. And we have choices. And what choices are going to maybe work better or worse? And then the last step in the 6 seconds model, which I think is quite unusual, is actually, I believe, the most powerful, which is the third step, which is about the why. What is it, the impact that we really want to have in the long term? What's the legacy? What is it we want to be adding to the world? And are we doing that right now? So that gives us a way to calibrate those choices. So it's one thing, okay, I've got this awareness and now I can make choices, but what choice do I make? How do I decide where to step forward? And so if we're going to effectively solve problems, what's the yardstick we use for effectively? And the yardstick we use is connecting to people and to purpose.
Since I see this play out in just about every client I work with every single day. So, prototypical, somebody comes to me and says, I have a problem with a coworker. The problem with a coworker is that coworker is jealous of me. And what am I supposed to do about this? And hands up, nothing I can do about it. But what I find people are doing is they've picked up on one set of behavior and they haven't really considered a range of options. So they haven't considered what other alternatives might be driving that person's behavior. How might that person be feeling? How are you feeling about what's happening there? And then when we open that setup, suddenly instead of there's nothing I can do about it, there's a whole range of things that you could do about it. And that's where I think the power comes. And then we're down to your notion of choose. Which one are you going to choose with what intention, with what legacy, with what purpose, with what connection?
Yeah. Well, what I hear is the first diagnosis tends to be behavioral.
Mm-hmm.
This person is not doing X. This person is doing Y. This person is saying Z. And those are behaviors. And so we use the metaphor of the iceberg and thinking about the behaviors are above the water. And then what's under the water and what's under that. And as we go deeper in the iceberg, we're looking at these intangible drivers that are not so easy. Well, they weren't easy for me to notice in the past. But as we develop this form of intelligence, we become better able to see and manage what's happening under the water. And as we start to see, oh, maybe that's why this person's reacting the way they are, and why I'm reacting the way I am. Now, I don't get to choose what that person does. I don't get to, I mean, people say things like, well, you have to hold people accountable or you have to manage others. I don't think that works. I think what we can do is we can manage ourselves, maybe. We can take care of our own part of the relationship and really show up uh, with an alignment between what's going on inside us and how we're responding and how we really want to be responding. If we can get those things aligned, we influence people much more effectively. And when we do that, the relationship starts to change.
Right.
So this kind of internal work of saying, okay, if I want that behavior in that other person to change, I need to change. I just saved you $30 because now you don't have to buy my book Inside Change, which is this notion that if you want change in your organization, change yourself.
Yeah. Hard one to get people to see. And I'm just going to make one more comment on that because then I want to talk about the data because I think data is so rich. But what I see is somebody says that person is jealous. What they're not acknowledging is what are you doing that's creating a reaction in that person. And often it's not jealousy, it's
Mm-hmm.
anger.
Mm-hmm.
You're stepping in my territory and trying to tell me what to do, colleague. And that creates anger and a pushback. And there's a whole range of things, but and then if you change what you are doing, you're going to change the reaction. So I'm totally bought into your model, I think is the bottom line, Joshua, if I get straight on it. So one, just to reiterate, it's about understanding my emotion at the depth, not just at the surface level, recognizing that emotion is going on all the time. I want to tune into it. Two is looking at the options I have, the actions I could take. And three is making a conscious choice based on intentionality, based on the connection I want, the legacy I want, the purpose I'm trying to achieve.
Yes. And we put it in a circle with the notion that it's a process framework. And I think one of the ways 6 seconds is different than a lot of approaches to emotional intelligence is we're really looking not just what is it, but how do we use it? So we have this process framework of this cycle we can go around and around and around. And then there are 8 learnable, measurable competencies that are like muscles that help us do those 3 steps that you just
Okay.
described.
All right. So what are the 8 competencies, just as a list?
In the awareness area is enhancing emotional literacy and recognizing patterns. And then in that choose yourself area, we have 4: apply consequential thinking, which is the evaluation, navigating emotions, which is harnessing and using those emotions, engaging intrinsic motivation, finding that energy within, exercising optimism to open up more possibilities. And then in that direction step, when we're actually going to move forward, we have increasing empathy to connect laterally and what we call pursue noble goals, which is about connecting with the future, connecting with how do I bring my purpose into the present right now.
Okay, great. Great. All right, fantastic. So let's dive into the research because that's the purpose for today and really exciting part about it. So you are saying that we're in an emotional recession. Explain. Why do you say that? What are you seeing in the data?
I think it's
Hold on,
helpful.
before I go there, let's go back. I just would like everybody to understand how many data points, like how many people, how many countries. Just give me a quick range on that one.
A randomized sample from 169 countries. We have about 400,000 people in the database in the current report, sampled down randomly to do the analysis, and we balance the sample by gender and age and geographic region. So it's a very large sample
And very
from a very
robust.
widespread part of the population.
Yeah, what I like about it is it's not Western centric and it is a very robust scientific investigation. All right, so now I'll go to my question. Emotional recession. Why? What's this about?
I think it's helpful to consider what an economic recession is.
Okay.
So, in economic recession, economists would say it's a sustained contraction of the output of the economy. And that includes things like it's harder to find money, there tends to be more unemployment, and this contraction um, basically there's less of the engine, the capital that is the engine of the economy. An emotional recession is a sustained contraction of the input to the economy. And that's the human energy that makes the economy, makes society work. So in emotional recession, instead of a shortage of cash, there's a shortage of motivation, of drive, of energy. Instead of, interest rates going up, what we see is conflict rates are going up.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of in an economic recession, we have unemployment. In an emotional recession, we have isolation. And so we have this kind of disconnection and this inability to switch metaphors for a moment. That the car, we've got this engine revving, the tires are spinning, but the car's not really moving. And so we're not able to kind of translate that human energy into productivity, into health, into thriving.
Certainly is a good description of the people that I've been talking to lately. Okay, so tell me the data. How does the data show that this is an economic recession?
Yeah, so we have 4 years now of continuous decline in emotional intelligence in every demographic group, in every geographic region. And we have a massive decline in the drivers of burnout. And it's a set of those three of those competencies that I described earlier, a set of them that we call drive, all have declined very significantly, over 5%. Um, and 5% might not sound like much, but you can imagine how the world would react if we had a 5% drop in our economic production, right? I mean, when we have a when we have a 0.5% drop in economic
Right, we
production,
feel it.
it's very alarming. Uh, when we're dealing with such a large sample, 5% is incredibly big. And as you said earlier, Wanda, the younger you are, the statistically, the worse this effect is.
Okay. All right. So it's a decline in a specific set of competencies that have to do with drive. And I think most leaders hearing this will say, yes, it feels like my workforce is less motivated, less engaged, less ambitious, less willing to kind of get in and give it that extra effort. And I think that's what you mean by drive. So, what are these indicators? What are the specific ones that have declined?
Well, I mentioned them before. The three that we call drive are engaging intrinsic motivation, which is finding that energy within. And that helps us to stay motivated, to stay focused, to stay value centered, to stay the course. Exercise optimism, which is about that sense that, okay, things might be tough. We're not talking about being positive. Exercising optimism is the work of seeing, okay, even when it's difficult, I have options. And that's declined over 8%. It's the biggest loss in the last 4 years. And that sense that, okay, my choice is I can do something to make the future better. And without that, it leaves people in a sense of paralysis and helplessness. And then pursue noble goals. Again, that connection between myself and my purpose. There are two parts to it. There's knowing what your noble goal is, but there's also this pursuing part. Can I do something to 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 live my purpose, to embody my purpose, to take action in my purpose? And that's declined over 7% in the last 4 years. And so what we see is a global population where people feel like they have less energy, less options, and less purposefulness.
Wow. Less
Yeah.
energy, less options, and less purposefulness. Josh, rationalize this for me. Every company that I'm dealing with has gone in the last 5 or so years to creating a massive purpose statement and putting it out in a big kind of campaign way and encouraging
Mhm.
conversations around purpose. and encouraging individuals to see how their purpose is aligned. I mean, I know organizations that have put enormous amount of work into this. How is it then that we don't know what our purpose is, and we're particularly struggling to figure out how to pursue activities that allow us to live that purpose?
I think it's connected to do my choices matter? Do I have efficacy? Uh, and I suspect there's a combination of factors going on in the world, which in the report, I talk about the term meta crisis.
Mm-hmm.
A meta crisis is a crisis that's more than the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm.
So we think about we're facing globally environmental destruction, economic uncertainty, social upheaval, uh,
Mm-hmm.
mental health uh, pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
uh, polarization, and probably more. Um, there's something about technology in there and the pace.
Yep.
Each of those is difficult. And when they start adding together, they become this tsunami. And there's a compounding effect. In addition, that's on the heels of pandemic recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about, for you all listening, Wanda, you and I have talked about this before that, during the pandemic, it was deeply depleting.
Right.
Right. And for me as an individual, for the members of my family, but also from my organization, our reserves were tapped. We cut to the bone to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all been doing more with less for years.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been adapting and adapting and adapting and, trying to find our way through it. And okay, here we are in, I don't know if it's post-pandemic or late pandemic period, but here we are. And we're not fighting fit.
Yeah.
We're in a place of exhaustion and depletion. And on top of that state of depletion, we have this meta crisis. And it's like, wow, we just made it through this incredibly difficult period. How are we going to navigate this new storm?
We have nothing left to do that. I think, in addition, and I want your reaction to this one, that we had a variety of connections with people with whom we worked, and they were loose. They were loose ties. But there were the ways in which information flowed. There were ways in which I felt like I was part of the organization. There were ways in which I knew who to call to get something done. Just this whole set of loose connections that felt, well, energizing in ways. You run into somebody casually and it's great to see them and all that good stuff. What I think we lost over the pandemic is all of those loose connections. And there
Mm.
hasn't been a mechanism for rebuilding them. So I think it's adding to the isolation that so many, the loneliness that Ryan Jenkins has written about, and I know you have written about as well. What's your reaction to that?
There are two kinds of relationships that we measure in our assessment. One is about more kind of personal community connections, family, friends,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other that we call network, which is kind of the broader professional connections, sort of broader interactions. What we've seen in our data, but also lots of other research that says those two kinds of relationships are the most important predictors of thriving. Uh, there's studies about longevity, there's studies about mental health, there's studies about motivation, there's studies about productivity that all point to the importance of relationship and these two kinds of relationships. And I think that I run an organization where we've been virtual for a very long time. I haven't had my entire team in a room together since 2004. So we have people all over the world and lots of different time zones, and we're a not-for-profit organization, so we're not going to spend money on flying people, to get together unless there's some very specific reason for it. And so we've been set up to be a remote first organization. And so we've been able to have great connectedness and a lot of relationship, but it takes a different kind of work. And I think the issue, Wanda, is when you try to use, a hammer to put in a screw, it doesn't work super well. And I think that's what's happened in a lot of workplaces is they've said, oh, well, we'll just, we'll have virtual meetings and we'll operate just like we did before, but we'll be hybrid. And that's just kind of dumb, really.
Yeah.
Like it's not enough to just say, okay, we're going to substitute one type of meeting for another. We need to develop the capabilities that allow us to make meaningful, trust-based, committed
Mhm.
connections in a virtual, hybrid, shifting, highly mobile uh, time in the world.
Right. Right. I see in most of the conversations that are happening in the clients that I'm working with is that the meeting has become shortened and
Mm.
everybody's task list has become longer.
Hmm.
The number of meetings has increased. And
Hmm.
so when we get to the meeting, we go immediately to task, 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 task. We do none of the niceties that we used to do. And it doesn't seem necessary because it's all on Zoom. So there is no check-in. There's no kind
Mm.
of casual chit chat, no connection point. And I think you're right that we have to intentionally put those in new ways in order to make this work. It's not going to happen over the water cooler as it did in the old days.
In 2020, my team and I had a conversation about this and said,
Mhm.
okay, so how are we going to increase our connectedness, maintain our connectedness? We had, I think, so many of us felt, kind of beaten down by the early part of 2020. It wasn't enough just to say, let's go back to 2019 level of
Right.
support. How can we actually have more? And so we implemented 2 weekly meetings, one at the start of the week, one at the end of the week. And the end of the week is water cooler time. I'd say in the beginning of the week, we maybe spend 20% of our time on water cooler stuff. And at the end of the week, we spend 80% of our time on water
No.
cooler stuff.
Yeah.
And by the way, those meetings they're scheduled for 50 minutes, but they're very often shorter. Um, but we'll do a little breakout and I'll usually ask some kind of creative question in one of those meetings, I said, okay, let's come up with creative questions that we can talk
Yeah, right.
about. And we made a list of 25 questions that would allow us to, kind of
Yeah.
check in and share with each other in different ways. Sometimes different people will lead an activity or a discussion. Um, but, a lot of it is about task. But
Mhm.
we also recognize that relationship is central to the work that we're trying to do.
Right. So it's intentional choices. And you can imagine how you do that with an immediate team, how you do that between two teams or five teams, or how
Mm-hmm.
many ever gets a little more complicated. All right. I want to come back to the research because I want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about the implications of this. You said in that there are three big things that have declined, three big competencies that have declined. The engaging in intrinsic motivation, which allows you to stay focused and have the energy and sustained and so on. You said that there's a decline in the ability to exercise optimism, dramatically so, by 8%, which affects people's ability to see that they can take an action, their sense of agency or efficacy, you said, and that there's a decline in their ability to pursue new noble goals, which means they don't feel that they can take an action to actually live their purpose. And that was also a dramatic decline, greater than 7%. Those three have to be worrying. So if you're giving advice to managers out there, what do you tell managers to do, given that's likely to be happening across their workforce?
Right. I think the first thing, Wanda, is you mentioned this before. It's likely to be happening for you,
Mm,
person listening.
yeah.
It's likely to be happening for you, Wanda, and for me,
Yeah.
right? And so I think the most powerful way that we influence other people's emotional intelligence is through our own. And so recognizing that we might need at this moment more support, we need to do things differently than we were doing a few years ago in order to restore some of those resources for ourselves. That's going to be I think, the first and probably most important piece of advice.
Okay.
In terms of intrinsic motivation, um, Dan Pink's Drive is a great way to learn more about intrinsic motivation. There's a lot about autonomy,
Hmm.
meaning, and mastery
Hmm.
that go into intrinsic motivation.
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of companies are struggling with this because they are, again, using the hammer from 2019 and trying to do mandates and trying to, you know, think about the way we measure performances by hours in chairs. And that's wasn't a useful measure in 2019, and it's a even less useful measure today.
Hmm.
Uh, Autonomy is about not about do whatever you want, but it's about here's the goal that we need to reach. How do you want to move forward towards it?
Hmm.
And if we can increase the amount of giving people their ability to work in a way that works for them and supporting them to do that, um, mastery are people using their strengths. So this would be two pieces for intrinsic motivation.
Okay. That makes sense. So autonomy is not total freedom, but autonomy is some choice about how you do the work that you need to do. And mastery is using your strengths. I think about all the recent studies, Cape Bravery in particular, and the notion that younger employees are coming to work wanting to make a contribution on day one, and that they think they have something to offer. We can debate if they do. They think they do, want to be able to use those strengths immediately, and they sit and can't. And that has
Mhm.
got to hurt the drive and the motivation faster than is necessary. So I can see how mastery and autonomy have a big impact
Yeah.
on intrinsic motivation.
I think that there tends to be a very strong kind of behaviorist carrot and stick orientation in a lot of companies.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the more you focus on those extrinsic motivators, the less intrinsic motivation you have. And uh, this is, a complicated paradox, but uh, there's quite a big body of research that supports this. I think there's an assumption that, well, if people are complying, that's the same as them being motivated.
Yeah,
And it turns out that it's the
not
opposite. So
right.
if you have a culture that's focused on compliance and you're trying to check the boxes that people are doing X, Y, and Z, you're probably undermining motivation. And as you said, that's going to affect people with less uh, authority more. And so chances are the younger employees, more junior employees are going to be even more feeling this workplace is transactional. This they don't actually care about me. I'm not actually important, and therefore I'm going to
Why
be
should I bother? Yeah.
very uninvested.
Hmm.
So, moving away from that kind of transactional, and I would say this is a very old model of leadership, this kind of command and control transactional, people are widgets. It's very comfortable in some organizations to think that way and in some cultures to think that way, but it doesn't actually motivate people. So you need to decide, is it important for you to have people motivated? And if so, well, understand how people actually work and stop doing the stuff that demotivates people. And I mean, it really isn't rocket science. Uh, in a day, we can train people to understand what actually motivates employees, and we can design organizational systems that are motivating instead of demotivating.
Right. Not that hard. I think we know that we don't want to be unpleasant to people, that we have to be kind to people in a way. But that kindness, that friendliness still is laid over the top of a fundamental carrot and stick.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm either going to use the stick to beat you. Hopefully, we don't have to have very much of that, but I've got a carrot dangling out there. If you do this, it is
Mm-hmm.
a little bit harder, then you can get this and this and this. And usually the carrot is pay or promotion.
Mm-hmm.
And the research that I know says that that kind of extrinsic motivator works only when it's a menial, repetitive, boring task.
Yeah.
like moving a load of bricks from one side to another side.
Yeah.
That's not the kind of work going on in most of the organizations I'm talking with people about. And they are the only one that works. Is something that's much more intrinsic, personally driven. Why is the person engaged in doing it? Okay, Josh, one of the things you say is double down on coaching. Why? Why do you say double down on coaching?
I define coaching as a partnership
Hmm?
among equals,
Okay.
where as a coach, I'm walking with you towards your goals. And you can hear in that a lot around intrinsic motivation, optimism, and pursuing noble goals. What's important for you, and how can I support you in that? And that's a very different way that, from this kind of command and control authoritarian approach to management. If I, as a manager or as a coach within an organization, if you have employees who feel like there are managers and coaches there to help them move towards their goals, and that there's an alignment between their goals and the company goals, something incredible is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So inherent in coaching is a shift in the nature of the relationship and the way that we manage to a collaborative approach that's about what's important for you as I used to say coachee, but that's such a weird word. As my coaching partner, to support you in where you're trying to go. And if I, as a manager, am able to do that, you're going to unleash what Fred Smith called discretionary effort.
Yeah.
Fred Smith's the founder of FedEx said, "This is, you pay people for a certain amount of effort, but what you need for high performance is a much greater effort, and that gap is discretionary. It's a gift from the employee. And why would the employee give that? Well, in part, if the employee's manager is like standing shoulder to shoulder with that employee saying, yeah, I'm here to support you to get what's important for you, to help you grow, to help you achieve your goals. Wow, that employee now feels something very different. And emotions drive people, and people drive performance.
Right. I think, a lot of people talk about inspiration. I'm going to take a shift in order to come back to this whole notion. Talk about inspiration and wanting leaders who are inspiring. And we often think about aspiring is some grand vision of what we're going to try to achieve and how wonderful that will be, and so on and so on. Yeah, that's useful and helpful. But when I ask people to identify a leader that they find who was inspiring, the leader did exactly what you were doing, what you just said. One, they understand what I want and they're helping me achieve what I want. And two, they believe I can do more than I even know I can do myself. So it's that partnering notion that I think is getting both the discretionary activity work that you're describing from Fred Smith, but it's also what creates that sense of inspiration.
What I ask people often, think about a leader who really brought out your best. And I do this, in when I'm doing keynotes all the time.
Yeah.
And we talk about those qualities. And I've done this all over the world. And there's one, when I ask them, what did that person do, or how did that person bring out your best? There's one thing that shows up over and over and over. And that is, they listened to me.
Yeah, I get
And,
that. Yeah,
again, that's what coaching's all about.
right. Starts with listening. Yeah, I think I don't want to pursue this one too long because I want to talk about the Gen Z and the implications of the research in Gen Z. But I think we think we're coaching when what we're actually doing is teaching, or maybe I
Mm-hmm.
should say instructing.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have a good model of what coaching really is. So I like your framework that it's in a partnership where I'm walking with you to achieve your goals.
Yeah. And Wanda,
That's not teaching.
yeah, I mean, I thought I knew a lot about coaching, and then my organization, we decided that we were going to develop a coach certification program. And in order to do that, we decided we needed some of us to get our master coach certifications. And so I went down this path of saying, okay, I'm going to really study coaching. ended up getting my master coach certification. I just ran our first master coach certification training. Um, and I'll tell you, spending now over a decade really studying coaching, it's super learnable. It's super practical. And we're now seeing more and more organizations saying to us, okay, so we know that external coaches are really helpful for us. So help us build the capacity internally. And
Yep.
I'm very excited about that development.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of the antidote to this
Mhm.
set of problems that we've
Mhm.
been discussing.
But we need new metaphors. We need ways of talking about it. And we don't have enough of those. So I like your framework. All right. I'm going to shift gears on you to talk about Gen Z. Um, so you have some particular data about this youngest generation. And I'm going to worry less about the exact years of Gen Z and into the millennials because it's the youngest folks in the organization. Tell me the observations from that group.
Well, just for example, we talked about pursue noble goals
Hmm.
has declined across all the generations around
Okay.
7%. For Gen Z, it's about 12%.
Okay.
So for this group, and we're not saying that they are lower, we're saying they declined more since 2019. So there's this huge loss for this generation of a sense that I know what my purpose is and I can put it into action. And I think based on my conversations with people in this generation, it's more about that latter part, that sense that my efforts today can actually impact the long-term future. And I mean, climate change is one mm, bright, shining example of this, where you have millions and millions of young people saying, "Look, we need to take this seriously," and year after year after year, the world doesn't seem to be taking it seriously. And so, at some point, as a young person, how do you interpret that?
Hmm.
You say, "Look, my future is imperiled," and you say you care about me, but the world's burning and you're not changing. It's a hard pill to swallow. It's
Right.
hard to reconcile those two things, and I think that is as I say, very strong example of why young people might be feeling this sense that they can't really influence the long term future.
Okay. Now, if I put that inside, so I get that in terms of climate change.
Yeah,
But if I put that in an organizational context with
sure.
an average manager out there, how is that lack that I can't pursue a noble goal, meaning I can't put my purpose in the action into action and I can't impact a long-term future in this company, in this job? How's that playing out there?
Well, it's playing out as demotivation. It's
Yeah.
playing out as detachment. Uh, but I think there's a couple of issues. One, earlier you said, well, a lot of companies are really talking about purpose.
Hmm.
Is it just something on the wall? Is it, this sort of nice statement that we're sort of spreading around? Or is it something that's really alive?
Hmm.
Is it something that people know, or is it something that people feel? And as a often, I think what happens is at a senior level, I hear leaders saying, yeah, we have this really clear purpose, and we never forget XYZ, or we're adding blah blah blah. And then when I talk to middle managers, they say, yeah, that's a lot of blah blah blah.
Hmm.
Right. And so somehow it's not translating into the day-to-day work of the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
So I think that's one piece of it is, are we actually changing our culture? Are we actually changing our systems? Are we actually changing the way we work on a day-to-day basis to make that purpose come to life? Or is this messaging?
Right.
And I think for young people, they're really sensitive to messaging. and they're really tired of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one piece of it. And then another piece of it is, where is your influence?
Mm-hmm.
And as a person who I really loved Václav Havel's book, The Power of the Powerless.
Mm-hmm.
He was a dissident poet and playwright in the former Czechoslovakia. And his notion was, if we, as people who are powerless, if we stand up, we have power. The power isn't that we have authority. The power isn't that we're in these leadership positions. And I often hear people saying, well, when I am a blah, 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 then I'll have power. And ironically, a lot of senior leaders that I work with feel very powerless as
Right.
well. And
Right.
they're like, well,
Yeah.
I'm beholden to our board. I'm beholden to our shareholders. I'm trying to, manage all these different competing commitments. I don't have power.
Yeah.
Uh, so where is that power? And I think that it's, that very overused Gandhi quote, be the change you wish to see in the world. What that's about is, how do I embody my own purpose? How do I take my purpose into the micro ways that I interact with people? And I think for all of us, and especially younger people, feeling like, if I have that clarity of purpose and I can live on a moment to moment basis, in the grocery store line, in a meeting, in a conversation with the people as I'm walking into a building, uh, in talking with a client, in having this conversation with you, am I able to bring that purpose into this moment? And I think that's a profound shift in the way we think about purpose, the way we think about the way we're influencing. If we have billions of us saying, I'm going to be a little bit more compassionate today. I'm going to be a little bit more supportive of well-being today. I'm going to connect just a little bit more today. That ripple effect is the antidote to this emotional recession.
Emotional recession. Okay. So this comes back to some clarity again in your model of what it is I want to be about. And it doesn't
What
have to
do I
be a
really?
grand, yeah, but like, what do I want my legacy to be? What do I want people to say about me? What do I want my brand to stand for? And it's, in some ways, I'm hearing just pick whatever it is, compassion or caring or helpfulness, whatever thing it is for you. And then say, can I do a little bit more of that today in every conversation?
When my kids were little, I used to say to them, what do you want to add to the world today?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in some ways, in a simplistic way, that's the notion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are all adding to the world today. What do you want to add? And are you going to just let, the moments of the day go by and kind of add whatever it is? Or are you going to intentionally say, you know what, I'm going to make sure that today I add a little more X?
Yeah, I love that one. Add a little more. I also love that because it isn't solve that problem immediately.
No.
It's do a little bit more of it, a little bit better. Okay.
Part of this pursue noble goals is about connecting the present with the future.
Mhm.
It's about shifting to a longer term perspective. And I think what happens, Wanda, when we are in this state of distress, we
Mhm.
tend to become very short sighted, very reactive,
Yeah.
and these kind of imminent threats. And if we can connect with this longer term picture and say, okay, wait a minute, what's the 10-year, 20-year perspective on this? If I look back on today, 20 years from now, what do I want to see?
Mm.
How did I show up?
I think that's also why we see all sorts of indicators that things are moving in a positive direction. It's just not massively moving in a positive direction. Climate change, we might disagree on, but on many things, there is progress, but it
Yeah.
feels so small and so slow. So I think there's some people get discouraged by that. And I think the long-term view is a really important one. All right, Josh, I can't let you go without asking this question, which is there are so many managers out there trying to manage Gen Z
Mm-hmm.
who believe that this generation is entitled, lazy, overly complaining, whining, not, super worried about their mental health and every single moment about their mental health. What's your response to those leaders?
I think in part there's some reality to that. This is a generation that has concerns that are perhaps different than older generations. There's some we're seeing in this data that this generation again across a global perspective is struggling with mental health and well-being. And yet what our data is also showing is that this is a group that has a very strong commitment to achievement. In fact, compared to all of the other generations, they have the biggest gap between their sense of achievement and their satisfaction. It's showing that they want to do more. They want to achieve more. They want to have more impact. And I think that we can be dismissive of that and say, oh, well, they just want to, they want to have unearned power. Or we could say, wow, they're actually committed to making a difference. And how do we connect the dots and support them to use that commitment to make a difference, to actually make a difference? And maybe their way of thinking about it is different than us, a little bit or a lot older folks. But rather than being in that place of demeaning and diminishing them, can we honor the strengths they are bringing and harness those? Uh, if you, as a leader, could say, what if I had a group of people coming into my company who were really passionate, who really cared, who had very strong values orientation, who wanted work to be healthy for themselves and for all of us and for our communities? Wouldn't that actually be an amazing thing?
Yeah, it sounds good to me. Okay, so I think the thing to ponder coming out of this one is, what if for this generation, their mental health is actually in a worse place than it was for prior generations at this moment in their growth and maturity?
Yeah.
I certainly think the optimism is different, for the levels of optimism are different for this generation than I experienced as I was entering the work world, and probably for other generations as well. So
And so
what if
then,
it's possible their mental health is really in a worse shape? It's not just them complaining, it's worse.
right. And as a manager, if I have an employee who's struggling with optimism, how do I help them see more possibilities and help
Yeah,
them see the choices
yeah,
they have? And uh, as part of my mentorship, as part of my coaching, as part of my management responsibility, is to help them grow in and strengthen their sense of choice and efficacy.
right. Okay. So if I entertain that possibility, then that's going to open up different ways for me to see how to engage them and how to harness their sense of caring, their commitment to values, their really wanting to create a healthy workplace and to make a difference and to achieve. But if I make them wrong at the beginning, I'm never going to get to where we need to go. So, Josh, if I come back over all of this and I try to summarize, oh my goodness, what a mistake to try to do this because there's so many tidbits in here. The thing to pay attention to is that we are in a emotional recession, which is going to impact the input to the economy, which is going to increase conflict. It's going to decrease our ability to get solutions, and the ability to produce is just diminished. It's diminished particularly around the intrinsic motivation, the sense of optimism, and the pursue noble goals. And that diminishment is worse for the younger generation than it is for other generations, particularly around the pursue noble goals, almost not 1.5 times. So the things for managers to do are to double down on the coaching, where coaching is a partnership, to focus and to connect the dots on the purpose, to think about the long term, focus on the long term actions, to rethink what it is your younger generation to may be needing to have a sense of being able to contribute and to achieve and to harness the power of what they have. And then I think also to recognize that each manager has their own individual needs about maintaining their emotional health and well-being, and take actions that foster that. How'd I do in a 30-second summary of what was a very rich, long conversation?
Fantastic. And I would just add, while it's a lot of bad news, it's also a lot of opportunity.
Right. And the companies that get it right, the managers get it right, have an awful lot to gain from doing it. So, Josh, thanks for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me.
My guest, Josh Freedman, the organization 6seconds.org. And join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.